What's up, dog, everybody? It's Torrential Downfall. Today I want to talk about young Philly, and I want to start by explaining why I haven't spoken about him or this until now. And as a trigger warning, I'll be discussing the topics of sexual assault and rape. So if this is a sensitive subject for you, please feel free to leave this video now. When the accusations of rape first came out in October 24, I kind of made it a bit of a deliberate decision to stay quiet on it. Not because I didn't care, but because without a trial, I didn't think it was my place to add to the noise. And there was a lot of noise. On one side, you had the manosphere defending young Philly, calling it a false accusation, saying he was being targeted because of his public image. Hoes will be hoes, they said. Women love to drag a good man down, they said. On the other side, you had council culture, declaring him guilty before a single piece of evidence had been heard in court. All men are dogs, they said. Not so young Philly needs to be locked up, they said. This case was always going to be divisive because of how public it was destined to be. But I believe that most people, regardless of who they are, what they're accused of, despite what my initial feelings may have been as well, they deserve a fair trial. Hopefully that's not a controversial statement, and it's a basic principle of justice. Now the trial has happened, there are a few things I want to share. Let me be a bit clear about the trial and kind of what was revealed. A 20-year-old woman, huge fan of young Phillies, went to his show in Perth in September of 2024. She believed she was going to a party. She did end up in his hotel room, but then her phone was taken away from her, and what's to follow can be explained. She was 20 years old, he was 28. She was a genuine fan of hers, someone whose videos she'd watched, whose music she'd listened to, and whose face she'd recognise all over social media. I mean, if you put yourself in her shoes for a second, think about the excitement of actually being able to meet someone who you'd admired for so long. That trust came with this familiarity, even though she'd never actually met the young Philly in real life. The prosecutor told the court what should have been an exciting night out, meeting her celebrity crush young Philly, was fun until it wasn't. That one sentence kind of gives you a bit of an understanding of the dynamic and what changed in that room. The court heard that sex between them initially began consensually. That's confirmed by both sides. What the prosecution argued is that during the encounter, young Philly became very aggressive, biting her neck, her cheek, her breast. The bites hurt, and she visibly, or should I say, she audibly said ouch, and asked the accused to be gentle. Said by prosecutor Danielle Clark. She'd withdrawn her consent because she'd feared for her safety. The prosecution described young Philly as an entitled man with a moderate degree of fame who had been sexually violent towards an impressionable young woman. Young Philly took to the stands in his own defence, acknowledging the biting but characterised it as consensual. In England, we would call it a love bite, he told the court. He denied that she asked him to stop, and I don't recall any blood, he said. The morning after the incident, she went back to young Philly, not to cause trouble, not to make a scene. She went back to show him what the night before had done to her, the physical consequences, the marks and bruises on her body. And according to what emerged from the trial, he showed no remorse. Now, let's be clear. Young Philly was not found guilty of rape on 3 charges. 3 further rape charges resulted in a hung jury, meaning 12 people couldn't agree either side. Those charges remain unresolved. prosecutors must now decide whether to pursue a retrial on those. He was found guilty on 2 counts of assault occasioning bodily harm. Young Philly actually wept when the verdicts were read. Before I go into some of my thoughts on this trial and what's been said, let's discuss a bit about the social media response, because I do think it is important. When the accusations first came out on young Philly, people noticed who said or didn't say what. The likes of Chunks, Angry Ginge, Harry Panero. These are people who had built careers alongside young Philly. They were peers, collaborators, even friends. But at the time, they distanced themselves publicly. I just kind of wanted to come in here and say, I support that decision. Similar to myself and not having said anything at the time. You do want justice to be able to, or a fair trial to be able to take its course. But particularly for these kinds of people, they are content creators. They make a living in the public space. They have an audience who trust them, and when accusations of such a magnitude are made, rape, choking, assault, you can't just be standing behind that person as if nothing happened, right? And it's very dangerous for their own livelihoods, let alone anything else. It's not about assuming guilt, but it's just understanding a responsibility that comes with people who are pioneers of social media platforms. And now that the verdict is in, I just want to kind of make it clear from my point of view that from what's been released from the case and the judgments that have come in, I don't think the social media space should be welcoming to rush young Philly back. Not yet, and maybe not for a long time. I mean, I'm not, he's not been sentenced to any rape charges, but that doesn't take away the assault and the advantageous nature of what we've heard from the trial. And talking about that as well, when we're talking about these rape charges, 3 of them are not conclusive, and so we don't know whether there's something further that might come about from those. And I think something that's maybe overlooked and hasn't been spoken about enough in the space is that there's this woman who was 20 at the time, who spent 2 years of her life fighting to be believed about this situation, who's fighting not just this potential perpetrator, but someone who's got far more fame, resources, and just in general more public sympathy than a redacted name could potentially ever have. And I guess that kind of brings me to what I wanted to highlight most when it comes to the young Philly trial and what I wanted to say today. Almost all of the noise that we've heard in this story has been directed at young Philly, his career, his future, his reputation. And let's be honest, I could be seen, and you're happy to say this, but you could say that about me right now in terms of the first 10 minutes of this video being all about young Philly pretty much. But somewhere in all of that noise, there is one person that's been kind of overlooked and forgotten when it comes to this case, and I just wanted to kind of bring a bit more light into the decision that that this victim has made in bringing this trial forward in the first place. In England and Wales, fewer than 1 in 6 victims of rape or assault are ever reported to the police. So that's less than 1 in 6. Think about that. For every person who does what this young woman did, there are 5 others who don't say a word, who carry the burden and the trauma alone. And to be honest, those reasons aren't that hard to understand. 61% of rape victims don't report because they fear retaliation. 54% don't trust law enforcement, and 48% believe that the police won't do anything even if they did report it. Even if a victim does report a rape, fewer than 1 in 75 reported rapes in the UK lead to a charge. 1 in 75. And yet, despite all the odds, against her and the way in which the system doesn't always treat, rape and sexual assault charges in a just way, this woman's come forward against a public figure, known that his face was known and, her name was going to be invisible. Knowing the odds, not even knowing what it could cost her though. So before anyone talks about a potential young Philly comeback, let's talk about this woman, her bravery, the trauma that she's been through all over this time. Before anyone talks about what this means for young Philly's career, let's talk about what these 2 years have cost this poor woman. She can never imagine the scale of the consequences, but she came forward with this case anyway. And I think that matters more than anything else in this story, given how true some of her accusations have been. Young Philly's sentencing is in August. The prosecution will decide on 3 unresolved charges. So this story is still far from over. But if you or anyone you know have been affected by anything in this video, you don't have to carry it alone. My inbox and DMs is always free for to talk to anyone about anything. But you can also contact Rape Crisis England and Wales on 0808 500 2222, a free confidential service available 24 hours a day. But thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, do something kind for yourself today, as long as it hurts no one.